I'm Oded Hareven, the CEO and co-founder of Akeyless. Join me to my Fireside chat with Ross Young, the former CISO of Caterpillar Financials, to talk about the current challenges of security, identity, securing machine identities, and protecting secrets. Ross, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right, awesome. Thanks for coming over.
Of course.
All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm one of those few people who always knew they wanted to do cybersecurity.
Right.
So I did a MBA and a focus in cybersecurity, had a chance to work at a number of three-letter agencies, did my internship at NSA, worked at CIA for over a decade, then spent time on the commercial side. So I went to Capital One, spent the last 4 years as the CISO of Caterpillar Financial, and now I'm the CISO in residence at Team 8.
All right, awesome. So what can you share with us I'm sure that along those years, you've been dealing with many different types of, cybersecurity issue and challenges, right? Generally speaking, things that you've seen that you remember the most that have impacted and maybe even, made you wonder what's happening. Like, what are the recent trends or the trends that you've seen?
I've seen these kind of shifts. First, it was, hey, we're going to trick the users. We're going to phish in and get on their laptops. Then it was, well, we want to steal the bulk data, so let's go after the developers. And now everything's in the cloud, so it's how do we go after these cloud resources and steal the data in the cloud? So different shifts at different points in time. Some things never go away. Certainly phishing's still around, but bad actors are always going to go for what's the easiest way to break in.
Yeah. Well, do you believe that in any way into mitigating phishing or like it's going to stay?
So I think we're doing really, really good things. Like the ability to stop 99% of email attacks through email security gateways is much better than it used to be. That being said, the bad actors also get better. Right now, they have the ability to use ChatGPT to write amazing emails that are carefully worded instead of that broken English that we might have saw from Nigerian print scams 10 years ago.
Yeah. So you're saying like there is hope because we're doing better, but on the same time, the adversaries are working better and they're becoming more and more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we need to be sharper than ever, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
Well, so let's talk about the notion of identity, right? Last few years, we're seeing more and more focus on identity within the, cybersecurity perception or, how to secure an organization, right? Back then, I remember 20 years back in the IDF, identity used to be and always have been an important pillar, but it was always, let's first protect the network, the entrance to the network, and let's protect the infrastructure, and let's patch, and things like that. And it looks like with time, identity became more and more central. What are the things that you were exposed to and the things that you've dealt with in terms of the challenges around identity?
Yeah, so the first thing is the idea of a perimeter has completely changed, right? Think about during COVID, everybody started working from home. So you didn't just have one work facility that you had to protect with one central VPN. You had, 10,000 employees working from home, 10,000 work centers.
Yeah.
So that changes things significantly in how you're going to centralize things. The next thing about identity is, what is identity, right? Is it just humans or is it computers? And this was something huge that I really saw when I was at Capital One. We had a big tool called Jenkins that we used to deploy our infrastructure everywhere. So it was the admin of admins across all the networks. Yeah. So, the fear was, hey, if somebody could get into that, they could laterally move through the entire organization as admins. So understanding how identity has shifted from just targeting humans with MFA to, system resources that are global are really important things to think about.
It was always a concern where you have like a manager of managers of all kind of configuration managers, right? Well, Jenkins obviously is a tool within the DevOps newer world, but think of other tools that were made in order to control other machines, right, or other computers for that sense, right? Ansible, for instance, and even beforehand, others like Microsoft MOM, right? There was all kind of either device management, machine management, patch management to make sure, that you're, first of all, knowing what you have in your network, and then patching it right and making sure everything is okay. That was the initial thing. But with time, the concern about the identities of those machines have become more and more evident. So you've mentioned the remote work on COVID. What are the things that you think that have influenced the importance of now machines? What really changed? Like, why is it now becoming a buzz?
So I think the DevOps movement has been largely amazingly successful. And just think about, if I have to manage 1,000 machines, I'm probably not going to log into every single one with an SSH manually one by one and go update all of those things and change the configuration. It's too burdensome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to write a script, whether in Ansible or something else, that says log into these machines, make these updates, and apply the same thing to 1,000 machines.
Mm-hmm.
And that ability to do that makes one developer 1,000 times more effective than they used to be. So everybody is shifting towards that maximum productivity route by using these infrastructure as code principles and other things.
Yeah.
Which means, hey, if you can get into the secrets into the code, then you can now use that to go after 1,000 machines. So it's a new way to kind of target companies from bad actors' perspective.
Okay, you've mentioned automation for
Yeah.
DevOps, right? Provisioning capability for like infrastructure as code, the ability to automate a lot of tasks that we used to know from the data centers, right? So all of the pizza servers, installment, etc. This is now happening on cloud, and DevOps are running their scripts and tools like. So maybe it's a good point for us to differentiate that the process of creating applications, right, within source code, the CI/CD process, right, of compiling the application, of integrating the application, of testing, right? That's within the initial phase of DevOps, which is creating the binaries, okay? And with that, the secrets within the code. Then there is the provisioning part.
Yeah.
Provisioning of, infrastructure as code, tools like Ansible, Terraform, and others that are used in order to take those code that have been compiled into binary and then to send it into the actual resources. And then there are other tools that are made in order to actually provision the resources, okay? So there's so many of them within what we call, you and I can look at it and say, oh, DevOps as, one title, but actually it says so much. And that means that there are many of those different places where secrets can happen or secrets can be. And the risk of secrets fall is much bigger than what most people think because, it's wider in terms of the process.
Yeah, when I used to run a DevOps organization, we had like 20 tools, right? You had GitHub because they needed a source code repository. You have Jenkins because they needed a CI/CD tool to deploy.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have every one of your scanning tools. Maybe you run SonarQube for code quality. Every one of those tools you can put secrets into so that they can connect to things. They can scan things. They have the permissions to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Which means every one of those things is something you need to secure.
All right. So the trend of using that more automation. Let's touch a little bit with, trends like containerization, right? Trends like the break of the monolith of software. Because when you think of it, in a way, although we have not done a lot of automation 15 years back or 10 years back, and we're now doing it much more, it's more than just that, right? There's also a major shift that in the last 10 years, the way that software is being built is actually built out of more components, micro functions and microservices. Have you seen that also within Capital One and other places?
Yeah, so if you were to go back and say, what did servers look like? You'd update a server to a good state, and then you'd save that snapshot as like an AMI or something else. And then what happens is people said, wow, that's a big image, and we don't even remember all the steps of how we got to that good image.
No.
So they said, let's write everything as code. And not only that, but we want to get to a smaller image. And so you see containers where people started shifting to very small operating systems like Alpine and others, where instead of an 80 meg system, it's an 8 meg system. Anyways, you take that, you combine it with, well, hey, we want to make something highly distributed, highly immutable, highly ephemeral, this triad that's so popular. And now you say, well, let me, cloudify everything and put everything in AWS. And before you know it, you don't just have an EC2 server, you have Lambda jobs and S3 buckets and load balancers and 20 other services on AWS. It is this giant thing you're trying to memorize and understand, and everything has to talk to all these things. And now you're like, well, how do I make sure this has the right permission? Because I used to just have one server and one database, and now I got, 30 different components.
I think this is exactly right. You now, articulated and you put into words the rise of the machines. This is what we're seeing, right? This is the rise of the machines where recent, researchers are talking about, 240% rise just in 2023 with the number of identities in the world. Machines comparing to humans, it's a ratio of 1 to 45. So if back then you could have entered into data center and to actually count these servers, right? And to get to thousands of those servers, today you can't count those. You can't even count those number of components, small components, and that the break of the monolith that brought with it a lot of more identities. So for 10,000 employees organization, you used to say, I have less servers. Today, you have 50 times more servers or machines or automated processes. And that means 500,000 of those machines.
Yeah, and it's a huge speed play as well, right? If I wanted to change just the one major server, well, I had to have everybody agree to it, and we do quarterly changes. But now when everything is a microservice, and I only change one microservice, I can do that 5-10 times a day because it doesn't always affect everybody else using that same server. So that change in that speed, I think, is why we've gone down this architecture. And I don't think it's going anywhere because it's so fast, it improves productivity.
Well, now let's get to the next place, which is now that we understand that there are far more secrets, there are far more machines, now we're getting into the actual reality of today, which is, attacks that we see. Uber, Bank of America, and other examples of those API keys and SSH keys and certificates and credentials that are out there that are being revealed or they're being found within source code repositories and other places. What do you see in that trend?
So I think there's a couple of things. The first is bad actors and criminals are going to do bad activities to gain money. It's never going away. There's always going to be that. And they've figured out that I don't just have to sell credit cards to make money. If I can sell the way to break into a company, that has value to another criminal group who wants to steal from that company. And guess what? It's a lot easier to get away with that because they don't even know that they've been breached at that point in time. It's only once you start to steal the data and then post it that it becomes highly known. So that focus and that shift of bad actors breaking into places only to steal credentials, I don't think is something we've really thought about. And it's happening more and more from Eastern European criminal organizations. And the second thing that we're also seeing with all of those things shifting is, hey, identity attacks are on the rise. Look at all the major data breach reports like Verizon. If you look at their attacks, identity attacks are the number one thing that's happening. And it's not just to small companies. It's good big name companies like you just mentioned, Bank of America, that spend millions, if not $1 billion, on their cybersecurity program. So these are big companies who check all the boxes, but still they're having issues with identity-based attacks, which means we have to focus on this area.
Now that we understand that we need to focus on that, now the question is, what can we use? We've seen, when I'm looking at the different tool set that is out there, and traditionally in that realm of protecting those secrets and machine identities, right? There's the machine identity and there's the secret that authenticate that particular identity, right? Sometimes we refer to API key as an identity, but actually the identity is the account on that end, right? The account on the database, the account of within the certain IAM of cloud, and then there's the API key or the certificate that validates it, right? Both of them need to be managed, obviously, and this is the secret to be protected. But when I look at the different tools out there, it seems like they're so different than many of them right now to protect this whole challenge and to overcome. What do you see when you look at it?
So you're right. There's so many things we have keys to, and we have to secure them. I'm going to maybe simplify that into a couple things. If I'm a bad actor and I'm going to target a company today, I'm going to find a developer that looks like interesting to me, right? Maybe they're working on a Swift account because they're the guy who oversees that from a bank. Or maybe they're the database admin at a health company. When I find those individuals and I fish them and I land on their box successfully, now I want to find creds to impersonate them, to get into the databases, get into the places of access. So if I just look at the history of everything they've done in the command line and the terminal, do I see things that here's their credentials to log in? And if I do, and I can steal those things, then I have valid access for a period of time. Now, the problem is, how long is that period of time? If I only rotate my keys every 90 days or every year, that's a lot of dwell time for a bad actor. Versus if we get to a place to where those keys become ephemeral. Hey, we rotate them once a day. We allow people to use it for 8 hours because that's a normal average work day. Then, now if the bad actor gets in, they have to come in every 8 hours if they want to have persistence on those machines. So that, I think, that mind shift of how do we make our keys more temporal, more ephemeral, or if we can even go, let's call it the holy grail of keyless, where you don't even have that, I think that's the direction of where we have to go as an industry.
Ross, when I think of it, what you've just described should have been resolved by privileged access management tools, isn't it?
Kind of, but it never was configured to work well for us. And let me just give you an example. Today, a developer may go to CyberArk, they may use a multi-factor to prove who they are, and then they get the credential. But like I said, if those credentials are valid for 90 days or for a year, that's the problem. The problem is the bad actor gets the credential after it's already authenticated from the developer, and now they have legitimate access. So it's not about can we MFA the developer, it's about how fast can we rotate the credential. That's the way we minimize our dwell time of the attackers.
All right. So when it comes to getting into the Jenkins, right, or what you've mentioned, or the CI/CD process, or to get into the infrastructure as code tool, right, from that point on, and also when configuration file within the containers, right, when machines speak with machine, they require those secrets, right? A container spins up, it requires some kind of a secret in order to authenticate to the database. In that space, the traditional privileged access management tools are not even in the game, right? They're not there.
Yeah, and I was surprised to see how many applications never changed those things. Like, hey, you could get an API key that never changed, right? And so if it gets stolen once, you basically have to burn it down to the ground and start from scratch.
Okay. So we've touched a lot around API keys and database credentials. But, and back to my previous statement that there are a lot of different tools out there today that a certain organization would need to implement in order to actually mitigate the problem. And we've just started with talking about privileged access management. When you think of it, SSH certificates or SSH management and certificate lifecycle management is also another tool that is required, and not just privileged access. I would also claim that KMS is also required, right? Like private keys and encryption keys. You need to manage them. There are still secrets within your environment that need to be managed. So the claim is basically, you would need to find yourself POCing so many different tools in order to create this identity fabric that Gartner is calling.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I think most CISOs are trying to do something where they're blocking secrets from entering their source code repositories. And maybe you start with a couple things like SSH keys or AWS keys. But what you find is developers come up with so many tools that you never even thought about. So it's, hey, I have to do the Kubernetes keys. I have to do this one unique Terraform key or every other thing. And before you know it, your pattern's only matching 10 keys, but the developers are using 200 keys. So you're not able to effectively block all keys going into the source code repository. So it's really about an education of how do we get them to think differently and remove keys entirely or make them very temporal.
So we understand that there is a problem, major problem that we all need to look at with the number of secrets that are being used with, proliferation of secrets, a secret sprawl among the whole process with lots of more identities. And there are now a lot of tools that you need to look at. And it sounds like it's almost impossible to pick and choose all of those different tools. Obviously, the Akeyless approach would be, we are unifying the whole different process, and we're unifying all of those different functionalities into a whole unified platform that allows to basically mitigate that from one place. So we talked about many different tools that a certain enterprise would need to select, right? The process of selection is cumbersome, obviously, when you need to choose so many different vendors and work with that. What's your take and experience with the fact that we have 5,000 different vendors in cybersecurity? I'm sure it provides a lot of more hassle. What do you think of, making yourself protected? How do you choose them? What's the process, the hassle?
Whenever I pick any tool, I always look at the total cost of ownership, which comes from three things. One, what is the cost to license X software? Maybe I buy Oracle, I got to pay Oracle a licensing fee. The second thing is the hosting costs. Do I host it on-prem or in the cloud and pay an AWS fee, for example? And then the last thing is the developer maintenance cost. Do I have to have two different administrators to host and maintain an app, keep it patched, keep it up to date, add new features? So those three things of licensing, hosting, and let's call it the human costs are the three things that make the total cost of an app. Mm-hmm. And when I look at those things, I have to say, is this solution that I'm going to give me the best price, as well as give me all the technical requirements to satisfy why I'm picking a solution?
Yeah. And I guess that you need to invest a lot of time of picking those solutions, right? Like the POCing process, etc., which is a lot of burden around it.
It all depends on the consequence of the tool. For example, if I pick a tool where every developer has to make 10 hours of code change to adopt that tool, that's a very expensive tool from the organizational perspective. However, if the friction is very low, where I can just deploy the tool in 10 minutes and I don't need anybody else's work to get done, that's a much lower friction ask to implement in an organization.
Which is a great thing with the DevOps movement, in which plugins are out there. And that with DevOps, are so used to have, to get plugin into a certain tool or a platform in order to inject secrets, for instance, like the Kubernetes secrets injector that basically protects those secrets and inject them on demand. So that's definitely things that have changed recently in the last few years of making it easier to deploy software into infrastructure, right? So selecting those tools, obviously, the process of it, you've mentioned resources costs and the time that it takes to deploy also, the self-deployed solutions. Let's talk about using SaaS for security solutions. For a long time, it has been a taboo, but it looks like in the last 4 years, it has been like tremendous change in how the security industry looking at SaaS solutions to secure their environments. Let's talk about this trend, because it looks like SaaS is being more and more accepted.
Yeah, so historically, CISOs were very fearful of using SaaS. Putting my data in somebody else's cloud makes it easier for it to be stolen. But right now, if we go back to this total cost of ownership model, hey, lower infrastructure costs, because they probably can do it more effectively at scale on AWS than I can in my own data center. And the second thing is the maintenance. Hey, if I don't have to host and configure and install and patch and update, that's a lot of time saved. So maybe I don't need the 2 or 3 headcount to maintain an app. I might only need 1. Mm-hmm. And so those lower cost of ownership have really driven organizations to pursue SaaS. We see it today. For example, the SIM space. Yeah. I don't think anybody's really hosting their own SIM anymore. Everybody's putting it into data lakes or cloud providers, and we're going to see that on all the other security tools.
So definitely identity is one of them, and data protection of all of its kind is going to be there. Like SaaS is definitely a king now today with security as well. And that's perfectly understood today. Do you find it troubling when you think of SaaS and using external solutions to secure? Do you think sometimes of the government access and the fact that there's capability under subpoena that your cloud provider would be subpoenaed and will be obliged to provide your data without your knowledge?
Maybe to a limited extent. I think most U.S. companies are going to get a U.S. hosting provider, and that's not a big deal. Now, if you're talking about, hey, your service is hosted in China or Russia, that's a completely different discussion. But I don't feel like that's a big ask for companies these days.
Speaking about SaaS solutions, right? And now speaking about machine identities and secrets, do you find it concerning that a SaaS provider would secure your secrets, whatever it's the data or the identities themselves? Do you find it troubling? And what are the things, that you meet when you think about SaaS solution?
Yeah, so there definitely is a worry that if a hosting provider has all of my secrets, and you can just think of like LastPass for human secrets, right, of logging in a website. Well, if LastPass gets breached and they lose all my passwords, do I now have to log into 100 different sites and change 100 different passwords that they stored for me?
Yeah.
That's a big pain, and most people are probably too lazy to actually go ahead and do that. And now they have, all of these passwords stolen for years, right? So I think that's a big concern for companies. And so, looking for mature solutions where it's, hey, they didn't just steal your password because now you have a passkey, now you have an MFA or something else on addition to that, where that provider, even if they're breached, can't cause you material harm to your system.
Yeah. Well, we call that the promise of zero knowledge, right? The Akeyless distributed fragments cryptography that is within the core of our platform ensures that we don't have access to the secrets of our customers. Although we're providing SaaS, it's a zero knowledge SaaS. And straight to the point, the encryption key that protects those secrets, right, is basically fragmented. It's created as fragments, and one of the fragments is kept on the customer side. So we don't have all the fragments of the key that is being used in order to encrypt those secrets from the first place. So the root of trust on that end is not even within our hands rather than within the customer hands. And we do that although we're a SaaS solution, so very low footprint on the customer infrastructure.
That's nice. It reminds me of like Apple when the FBI was trying to come after them to, break into somebody's iPhone.
Yeah.
If they don't have the keys, then there's nothing to subpoena and request from a company like Apple.
Exactly. And the beauty of it that no one actually have the whole fragments, neither the customer. So even if they attack your network, right, it's not enough. They need to attack your network and our network at the same time, because all of those fragments, they refresh. Their mathematical value is being refreshed all the time. So it's like, think of it like the rotation of the root of trust that constantly is happening.
Yeah, it's like a bank vault with two keys.
It's like Die Hard 4.0, where everything is, you need to use multiple keys at the same time in order to open it. Ross, thank you so much for coming over and spending this time with me and talking about machine identity secrets and the evolution of, the compute and DevOps.
Yeah, of course. Like I mentioned before, I think identity-based attacks are here to stay. They're the number one attacks right now, according to Verizon Data Breach. We're creating more of these every day. You mentioned 45 times more than human things. Well, guess what? If we're not inventorying them, if we're not securing them, if we're not rotating them, if we're not making them ephemeral, we're going to have an issue. So that's why I think it's so important that CISOs pay attention, because this is an area we have to do better.
What are the things that you're currently busy at that excites you the most?
So right now, I'm at Teammate, and I have the wonderful opportunity of creating a CISO network, which means I get to talk to a lot of CISOs, understand what's going well, what's going wrong, and where we need to improve, and then looking at the industry to say, what are the new technologies that can help us? So that's probably the coolest part of my role right now.
All right. And how can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. That's a super easy way. You can just search Ross Young on LinkedIn, and you can schedule a meeting directly on my profile. Or you can look at our Teammate events. There's a lot of things that are upcoming, so just follow Ross Young or Teammate to find more.